Solveig, you need to destroy everything. The voice on the phone was barely a whisper, cracked with age and fear. They know about Grimmer. They're coming for him tonight. My hands trembled as I gripped the receiver, the old rotary phone suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 kilos. Who told you this? Your father's old contact, the one who survived. Solveig, they have weapons now, new weapons. Weapons that work on creatures like him. That phone call came 3 hours ago. 3 hours ago, I learned that the Order of the Sacred Hammer was planning their final strike tonight. Not just against Grimmer, the ancient troll who has been my closest companion for 40 years, but against Helga, the female troll deep in Jotunheimen's mountains, 1 year into a 30-year gestation period. Against the future of an entire species that has survived in hiding for centuries. But to understand why this moment matters, why I'm about to make a decision that will change everything, you need to understand how we got here. How do you choose between a secret that has defined your entire existence and the life of a being who has walked this earth for 8 centuries? How do you decide when the world demands proof, but proof means death? When the lies told by our ancestors have become so deeply embedded in our collective memory that the truth sounds like madness. These are not hypothetical questions for me. They are the questions that have haunted me every single day since I was 19 years old. My name is Solveig Bergström, and for 40 years, I have protected something that should not exist according to everything the modern world believes. Something that the world dismisses as nothing more than a fairy tale told to frighten children during the long, dark Norwegian winters. But I know better. I have seen the truth with my own eyes. I have touched it with my own hands. Before we begin this story, don't forget to subscribe to support our channel. It was December 1983 when everything changed. I was 19 years old, barely 2 months past my father's funeral. Heart attack, they said, quick and painless. A natural death for a 52-year-old man who seemed healthy one day and was gone the next. It was a lie. But I believed it because I was too young and too broken by grief to question it. My father, Erik Bergström, left me his cabin. An isolated structure carved into the eastern face of Hardangervidda, Norway's largest mountain plateau. It was 3 hours by car from the nearest village of Eidfjord, accessible only by a treacherous dirt road that disappeared entirely under winter snow. Most people in the village thought my father was crazy for living there. I thought he was running from something. I was right, but not in the way I imagined. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits. Rough timber walls blackened with age, a massive stone fireplace that dominated the main room, and shelves packed with books in Norwegian, English, and what I would later learn was Old Norse. My father had been a respected scholar of medieval Scandinavian history before he became a hermit, specializing in Norse mythology and folklore. The night it happened, I was completely alone. Of course I was alone. I was always alone up there in those early days. A blizzard had been building for 3 days, the kind of storm that makes you understand viscerally why our Viking ancestors believed the world would end in ice and darkness. The wind screamed like a dying animal against the cabin walls, and snow piled against the windows until I could barely see the world outside. I was reading one of my father's journals by lamplight, trying to understand the cryptic notes he'd left behind, when I heard it. A sound that should not exist. A deep, rumbling groan that seemed to come from the earth itself, followed by something massive colliding with the side of the cabin with enough force to shake the walls and send books tumbling from shelves. My first panicked thought was avalanche. My second thought was bear, though bears should have been deep in hibernation. Neither assumption was correct. I grabbed my father's old hunting rifle from above the fireplace, more for psychological comfort than any real belief it would help against whatever was out there, and I cracked open the heavy wooden door. The cold hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. And there, collapsed in the snow barely 3 meters from my door, was something that should have been impossible. Even now, 40 years later, with all the perspective and understanding I've gained, I still struggle to adequately describe what I saw in that first moment. It was humanoid in the most general sense, but massive beyond anything that should be able to exist. Perhaps 4 meters tall, with skin that looked like weathered granite, gray and rough with patches of moss and lichen growing in the deep crevices. Its body was covered in what might have been thick fur or might have been more moss. I couldn't tell in the darkness and swirling snow. One enormous arm was stretched toward my door, and I could see wounds, deep gashes that wept something dark and thick onto the pristine white snow. Its face was the most shocking part of all, because despite the enormous proportions, despite the stone-like skin and the utterly alien anatomy, there was unmistakable intelligence in those eyes. Deep, ancient intelligence, and pain, profound pain, and fear. The creature was terrified. I should have run back inside immediately, slammed the door, barricaded myself in, hidden until morning when I could drive down the mountain and never return. But I am my father's daughter. And something in those desperate eyes reminded me powerfully of the way my father had looked at me the last time I saw him alive, 3 months before his death, when he had gripped my hand with surprising strength and said words I didn't understand at the time, but which would come to define my entire life. If you ever find something impossible, Solveig, don't run from it. Try to understand it first. Try to help it if you can. That's what makes us human. So instead of running, I stepped out into the screaming storm. The creature's eyes tracked me as I approached cautiously, but it didn't move. Couldn't move, I realized as I got closer. Its left leg was bent at a completely unnatural angle, clearly broken, and there were more wounds along its massive torso. Puncture marks that looked disturbingly like bullet holes. Someone had shot this thing, multiple times, and it had still managed to make it to my cabin before collapsing. "Can you understand me?" I asked in Norwegian, feeling utterly ridiculous even as the words left my mouth. I was talking to what appeared to be a giant moss-covered rock creature in the middle of a blizzard. The creature's eyes widened slightly. Then, in a voice that sounded like stones grinding together deep underground, ancient and tired beyond measure, it spoke. "Jeg, forstår. I understand." My legs nearly gave out beneath me. It spoke Norwegian. Old-fashioned, archaic Norwegian that belonged in medieval sagas, but understandable Norwegian nonetheless. "You're hurt," I said, stating the obvious because my brain couldn't process anything more complex in that moment. "Jägare," it rumbled, the word vibrating through my chest. "Hunters, with new weapons. I escaped, barely." The word it used for hunters was jäger, but the way it pronounced the word carried layers of meaning beyond simple translation. Not just hunters of animals. Hunters of its kind specifically. Professional hunters who knew what they were hunting, whatever its kind was. "I can't move you myself," I said, making a decision in that moment that would define the rest of my entire life. "You're too big, but I can bring supplies out here. Try to help with the wounds." Why? The question was simple, but carried the weight of centuries of experience. Your kind has always killed mine. Always. For as long as I have lived. Why would you help? "My kind has done a lot of stupid things," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "That doesn't mean I have to keep doing them. That doesn't mean I can watch someone suffer when I could help." Something that might have been a smile crossed that impossible stone face. "Your father said the same thing many years ago. Almost exactly the same." Time seemed to stop completely. The storm faded into background noise. "You knew my father?" "He saved me once before. Years ago. Kept the secret. Made me promise to stay hidden. To stay safe. He was a good man. A rare man." The creature's breathing was becoming more labored, the words coming slower and with obvious effort. "There is a warm cave behind your cabin. Old entrance, hidden under the snow and rocks. Please, I cannot die in the open. Cannot let them find my body. Too dangerous. For others." And with that, consciousness left those ancient eyes. I stood there in the screaming blizzard, looking at this impossible creature that claimed to have known my father, that spoke of others like itself, that feared what would happen if its body was discovered, and I made my choice. I would trust it, just as my father apparently had years before. It took me nearly 2 hours of searching in the storm to find the cave entrance. It was hidden behind a carefully arranged pile of rocks and packed snow, completely invisible unless you knew exactly where to look and what you were looking for. The tunnel entrance was narrow at first, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through, but it widened as it descended deeper into the mountain. The tunnel led down at a steep angle for perhaps 50 meters before opening into a chamber that took my breath away. The cave itself was absolutely astonishing. It wasn't entirely a natural formation. I could see that immediately. The walls were too smooth in certain places, marked with symbols and patterns I didn't recognize. The space opened into a massive chamber easily large enough to house several cabins, with a natural hot spring bubbling up in one corner that kept the temperature remarkably, almost impossibly warm, despite being deep inside a frozen mountain. And there were things here, artifacts clearly placed by intelligent hands. A wooden chest carved with intricate interlocking patterns, tools that looked ancient but carefully maintained, books wrapped in oilcloth for protection, written in languages I couldn't even begin to identify. This had been someone's home, a home my father had apparently known about and kept secret. "This was my home before," the creature managed to say as I helped it drag itself inside through the tunnel, a process that took both of us working together for nearly an hour. "Your father let me stay here, said it was safe, secret. He brought supplies sometimes. We would talk." Once inside the warm cave, I could finally see the creature properly in the light from my lantern. It was simultaneously more and less terrifying than it had been outside. More, because I could now see the true scale and strangeness of its anatomy. Less, because I could also see the very human expressions of pain and exhaustion on that craggy face. "What are you?" I finally asked the question that had been burning in my mind since the moment I saw it. Those ancient eyes studied me for a long, measuring moment. "Your people call my kind troll." The word hung in the cold cave air between us. Troll, the monster from every Norwegian fairy tale I'd ever heard as a child. The creature that lived under bridges and stole children. The beast that ate travelers and turned to stone in sunlight. The nightmare that parents invoked to frighten their children into good behavior. But this being in front of me didn't match those stories at all. It was terrifying, yes, in its sheer size and profound strangeness. But it wasn't monstrous. It was wounded and vulnerable, and afraid. It spoke with intelligence and obvious education. It had known my father and earned his trust. "My name is Grimr," it continued, voice slightly stronger now that we were in the warmth and safety of the cave. "I am, or I was, one of the fjellvokterne, the mountain guardians. There are not many of us left now, not many at all." "Mountain guardians?" I repeated, latching onto the phrase. I've never heard that term. The old stories never mentioned anything like that. The old stories, Grimr's voice carried something that might have been bitter laughter, are lies, young one. Carefully crafted lies told by those who wanted to justify what they did to us, what they continue to do to us even now. I spent that entire night in the cave, tending to Grimr's wounds with supplies from my father's surprisingly well-stocked medical cabinet back at the cabin. The injuries were severe, some of the bullet wounds were deep, but my strange new companion assured me that his kind healed much faster than humans when given time and warmth and safety. And as I worked cleaning and bandaging wounds on a creature that shouldn't exist, Grimr began to talk. He told me things that fundamentally shattered everything I thought I knew about Norwegian history and folklore. "We were never monsters," he said as I worked, his voice growing steadily stronger as the hours passed and warmth returned to his massive body. "We were protectors, guardians placed by the old gods themselves to watch over the wild places of this world, the high mountains, the deep forests, the cold waters, Every region had its designated protectors. There are others? I asked, fascinated despite the absolute impossibility of the conversation I was having. Other creatures like you? Not like me exactly, but yes. Different kinds of guardians for different places and purposes. The huldras protect the deep forests and the ancient groves. The fossegrims watch over the rivers and waterfalls. The nøkken guard the deep lakes and dangerous waters. The draugr, they are perhaps the most misunderstood of all. Draugr? The undead Viking warriors from the old legends? Grimr made a sound that might have been a tired sigh. Not monsters, not undead in the terrible way your stories tell it. They are, or they were, honored warriors who chose to continue protecting sacred Viking sites and burial grounds even after their physical deaths. Guardians of places where important secrets and knowledge were buried. But when the Christians came with their new religion, they called the draugr demons and abominations, killed them, or destroyed the places they protected until there was nothing left to guard. I sat back on my heels, my mind reeling from the implications of what he was telling me. Why would anyone do that? If you were protecting things, if you were helping maintain the balance of nature, why would humans want to eliminate you? Because we protected the old ways, Grimr interrupted, and there was profound, ancient sadness in his voice. We guarded the sacred groves where the old gods were still worshipped. We kept watch over the places where vulvas and cider practitioners maintained their magical traditions. We defended the sites where ancient knowledge was preserved in ways the new Christian authorities couldn't control or understand. And when Christianity came to Scandinavia, Grimr continued, we became obstacles to their complete domination. We became proof that the old ways had power. We became demons in their theology, proof of pagan evil that needed to be systematically destroyed to save souls. He shifted slightly, and I could see the pain in the movement despite his obvious attempts to hide it. The stories you know, Solveig Bergstrom, were not accidents of folklore. They were propaganda. Systematic, careful, deliberate propaganda designed over centuries to make our elimination seem like heroism and righteousness rather than the genocidal erasure it truly was. The weight of that word hung heavy in the air. I would need to remember not to use that exact term if I ever shared this story publicly. YouTube's algorithm was sensitive to certain words, but Grimr's meaning was devastatingly clear. They told stories about trolls stealing Christian children and eating them, Grimr continued, his voice heavy with centuries of injustice. Complete fabrications. We saved lost children from the mountains and brought them home safely to their desperate families. But the church systematically twisted these heroic rescues into abductions. They claimed we ate the children or enslaved them or corrupted their innocent souls with pagan magic. But why would anyone believe such horrible things? Because fear is humanity's most powerful tool for control, Grimr said, with the weariness of someone who had watched this pattern repeat for centuries. And because sometimes, just sometimes, there was just enough truth mixed with the lies to make the propaganda believable and effective. He was quiet for a long moment, and I sensed there was something deeply painful he wasn't telling me. Some of us, he finally continued, his voice laden with old grief, went mad. From the constant hunting, the unrelenting fear, the unbearable loss of so many of our kind over the centuries. They lashed out violently at humans who didn't deserve their rage, killed innocent people in their pain and madness. These rare incidents of violence by traumatized, broken individuals were then used cynically to justify hunting and killing all of us. The desperate actions of a suffering few became the defining characteristic of our entire species in human eyes. I thought about that for a moment, about how tragically easy it is throughout all of history to define an entire group by its worst members, to use the crimes of broken individuals to justify the persecution of everyone who shares their characteristics. The huldras, I said, deliberately changing the subject slightly. You mentioned them earlier. I've read the old stories about them. They're supposed to be beautiful forest spirits that seduce men and lead them to their deaths in the woods. Grimr laughed, a sound like distant thunder rolling through the cave. Seduction. Is that really what they call it in the stories now? Huldras are fierce forest guardians, dedicated protectors of the ancient woodlands and the delicate balance of nature. They appear as beautiful women, yes, because your kind responds powerfully to beauty and is far more likely to listen and learn. But they don't seduce men for pleasure or malice or entertainment. They test them. Test them for what exactly? For whether humans can truly be trusted with the forest's deepest secrets and power. A huldra will approach someone who is lost in the deep woods. If that person treats her with genuine respect, if they can see past her beautiful appearance to her true nature, if they acknowledge the hollow back and cow's tail that mark her as something other than human, she will guide them safely home and perhaps share valuable forest wisdom and protection. And if they don't pass the test? If they see only a beautiful woman to be possessed or deceived or used for their own gratification, if they react with violence or lust or profound disrespect, she leaves them to find their own way out of the forest. Often, they don't succeed. Hence the stories about huldras leading innocent men to their deaths. It's not cruelty or evil. It's simply consequence and natural justice. I absorbed this information carefully, trying to reconcile these new truths with the fairy tales I'd grown up hearing and believing. And the fossegrims? I asked. What's the real truth about them? Ah, the water spirits. Truly magnificent beings. They do play music. That part of your stories is actually accurate. Hauntingly beautiful music on fiddles and harps beside waterfalls and rapids. And yes, they do teach humans who approach them with proper respect and genuine love for music and art. But the stories about them demanding blood sacrifices, about them being dangerous demons who drown the disrespectful— Let me guess, I interrupted. More propaganda and deliberate distortion? More complication and misunderstanding, Grimmer corrected gently. Fossegrims are deeply, profoundly tied to the water they guard and protect. If someone comes to the water with ill intent, planning to pollute it or dam it or destroy it for profit without regard for consequences, the fossegrim will defend their territory and their purpose, sometimes violently, sometimes lethally when they have no other choice. Those deaths in defense of nature and balance were called cold-blooded murder by humans. Protection of one's sacred home was labeled as demonic possession and inexcusable evil. I was beginning to see the clear, repeating pattern emerging. Every story, every legend, every piece of folklore had a kernel of genuine truth at its core. But that truth had been systematically wrapped in thick layers of distortion and purposeful deception over long centuries. What about the nøkken? I asked. The stories about them are particularly dark and frightening. Water horses that drown innocent children for absolutely no reason? Grimmer's expression darkened with what looked like genuine, profound grief. Nøkken are perhaps the most tragic of all of us in many ways. They guard deep lakes and ponds, specifically the places where dangerous underwater currents and hidden caves can trap and kill even experienced swimmers. When children would play too close to these genuinely dangerous waters, completely ignoring all adult warnings, the nøkken would try desperately to frighten them away from mortal danger. By appearing as a horse? By appearing as whatever form might effectively scare a stubborn child into leaving the dangerous area immediately. Sometimes a horse, yes. Sometimes other frightening shapes and sounds. But children are naturally stubborn and endlessly curious, and sometimes they drowned despite the nøkken's absolute best efforts to protect them by scaring them to safety. The grief of a nøkken who fails to protect a child from drowning is profound and utterly devastating. But humans saw only a child drowned near a lake where a nøkken lived, and the legend of the child-killing water horse was born and spread. I sat there in the warm cave, listening to an impossible creature tell me impossible truths, and I felt my entire understanding of the world and history shifting beneath me like unstable ground during an earthquake. How many of you are actually left? I finally asked the question I was almost afraid to hear answered. How many trolls and huldras and fossegrims and all the others? The silence that followed my question was heavy and oppressive, filled with loss. Of trolls, specifically? Grimmer finally said quietly. 3 that I know of with absolute certainty in all of Norway. Perhaps a dozen huldras scattered across Scandinavia, though I've lost contact with most. 5 or 6 fossegrims, though it's been many years since I had direct contact with most of them. Maybe 10 nøkken still surviving and hiding. The Nisser are somewhat more numerous because they are much smaller and easier to hide successfully in human spaces. Perhaps a few hundred of them scattered across all of Scandinavia, living in barns and attics. That's all? I felt my heart physically breaking. Out of what must have been many thousands originally. That's all that survived the Great Erasure. Hundreds of years of systematic, methodical, organized hunting and killing. We went from thriving thousands to desperate dozens. From healthy communities to isolated survivors who rarely dare to contact even each other. I don't understand how this is even possible, I said, feeling completely overwhelmed. How have you managed to stay hidden in the modern world, with satellites and cameras and technology absolutely everywhere? We hide far better than you can possibly imagine, Grimmer said. We've had long centuries to perfect the delicate art of invisibility and camouflage. And there are certain abilities we possess, ways of existing that your kind dismisses as pure myth or misunderstood natural phenomena. Like what abilities? Like the stone sleep that features so prominently in your troll legends. Grimmer shifted his massive body, settling more comfortably against the smooth cave wall. Your stories claim that trolls turn to stone when exposed to sunlight. A terrible curse or a fatal vulnerability. The truth is far more complex and far more useful for survival. We can choose to enter a state of very deep dormancy. Our bodies harden and become truly stone-like in every measurable way. We can remain in this state for days, weeks, even years if absolutely necessary. To any observer, even one with sophisticated scientific instruments, we appear to be nothing more than unusual but entirely natural rock formations. You've seen mountains with features that look like sleeping giants, yes? I nodded, thinking of a dozen famous rock formations across Norway that tourists photographed constantly. Formations that were said in local legends to be sleeping trolls turned to stone. Most of those are simply rocks shaped by wind and water and time, Grimmer continued. But some of them, a very few, are actually my people in deep hibernation, waiting patiently for danger to pass. Healing from wounds that would kill us if we remained in vulnerable flesh, surviving through periods when discovery would mean certain death. That's absolutely incredible, I breathed. But why do all the stories insist that sunlight forces you to turn to stone? That it's an involuntary weakness you can't control? Because we learned long ago that it was far safer to be active at night and sleep during the day when humans were most active and alert. Humans noticed that they never saw us during daylight hours. The assumption that sunlight was somehow deadly to us followed naturally from that observation. We didn't correct the misconception because it actually helped keep us safe. Better to let them think we were vulnerable to something we could actually control completely. I was about to ask another question when Grimmer suddenly tensed, his entire massive body going completely rigid. "Someone is coming," he said, his voice dropping to barely more than a whisper. "Multiple people. On foot. Moving carefully and quietly. Your father taught me years ago to feel vibrations through the mountain stone. There are at least 4 of them approaching your cabin right now." My blood went cold. "The hunters who shot you earlier? Perhaps. Or perhaps simply innocent travelers or researchers. But given my very recent violent encounter with hunters and their new weapons, I think we should assume the worst possible scenario." Grimmer began the clearly painful process of pulling himself to his feet, obviously in agony but absolutely determined. "You should go back to your cabin immediately. Pretend you know absolutely nothing about me or this place. If they are what I fear they are, you being here with me puts you in terrible danger." "I'm not leaving you," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Not to face them alone." "Solve? My father protected you," I interrupted firmly. That means something profoundly important to me. It means I'm not running away now. I'm not abandoning you to face this alone. Those ancient eyes studied me for a long, measuring moment. You are very much like him, Grimmer finally said softly. Stubborn beyond reason, brave beyond wisdom, probably foolish beyond measure, but good. Truly, genuinely good, in a way that is increasingly rare in this world. I extinguished my lamp and made my way back through the tunnel toward the cabin, moving as quietly as I possibly could. The storm had finally died down completely during the long night, and dawn was breaking over the vast, empty expanse of hardangervidda in shades of gray and pale blue. And there, trudging determinedly through the deep snow about 100 meters from my cabin, were 4 figures in heavy winter gear. I took a deep breath, composed my face into what I desperately hoped was a neutral expression, and emerged from behind the rock pile that concealed the tunnel entrance, making it look like I'd simply been outside checking on snow accumulation around the cabin's foundation. "Hello there," I called out cheerfully, waving as if I'd been expecting visitors, or at least wasn't surprised by them. The 4 figures stopped, conferring briefly among themselves before one of them waved back and they continued their determined approach toward me. As they got closer through the snow, I could make out more details. All men, all appearing to be in their 30s or 40s, all carrying equipment that looked far too sophisticated and expensive for simple winter hiking or innocent research. One had what was unmistakably a rifle case strapped to his back. Another had something that looked like advanced tracking equipment with multiple antennas. These were hunters, just not the kind who hunted ordinary animals. "Good morning," the lead man called out in Norwegian, though his accent suggested he wasn't originally from this particular region. "We're very sorry to disturb you so early. We're tracking a large animal, possibly a bear, that was wounded yesterday. Very dangerous, potentially rabid. Have you seen or heard anything unusual during the night?" I kept my face carefully neutral, years of watching my father play poker with villagers suddenly paying off in an unexpected way. A bear? Up here in the middle of winter? That's extremely unusual. They should all be deep in hibernation by now. "This particular one is very unusual indeed," another man said, and something about the way he emphasized the word unusual made my skin crawl. "We've been tracking it for 3 days now. The trail led directly past your cabin. You really haven't seen or heard anything at all?" "I've been inside almost constantly because of the blizzard," I replied, which was technically true even if deeply misleading. "Didn't see or hear anything outside. What kind of bear are we talking about exactly?" The lead man's eyes were scanning the area around the cabin with uncomfortable, professional intensity. "You live here alone? A young woman like yourself in such an isolated location?" "I inherited the cabin from my father," I said, deliberately keeping my voice calm and steady. "He taught me everything I need to know about surviving up here. I managed just fine on my own." "Your father," the third man said, speaking for the first time. His voice was distinctly cold. "Would that be Eric Bergstrom?" My heart stopped beating for a moment. They knew my father's name. They knew exactly who had lived here. This was not a coincidence. "You knew him?" I asked carefully. "We knew of him," the man replied, and there was something cold and knowing in his slight smile. "He was quite famous in certain circles, a respected scholar who spent his final years living in complete isolation. Some people said he went a bit mad toward the end, believed in trolls and forest spirits and old gods. Quite a shame what happened to him." The way he said shame made it sound like anything but shameful. It sounded almost like satisfaction. "Heart attack," I said carefully, watching their reactions closely. "Very sudden. The doctor said it was quick." "Yes," the man agreed, still with that cold smile. "Very sudden indeed. Quite remarkable for a man who was in otherwise perfect health just days before. Quite remarkable how these things happen sometimes." The implication hung thick in the cold morning air between us. These men knew something about my father's death. These men might have been directly involved in my father's death. "Well, I haven't seen your bear," I said, taking a deliberate step back toward my cabin door. but I'll definitely keep an eye out. If you want to give me a way to contact you if I see anything—" "That won't be necessary," the lead man interrupted smoothly. "We'll be conducting a thorough search of this entire area over the next few days. We might need to look around your property as well. For public safety, you understand. We can't have a dangerous animal roaming around threatening innocent people." It wasn't phrased as a question or a polite request. It was a statement of absolute intent. "Of course," I said, knowing I had no real choice or power in the matter. "Though I should probably warn you, there are some pretty steep cliffs and unstable areas around here. My father marked all the dangerous zones with red paint on the rocks. I'd strongly recommend staying away from those marked areas unless you have proper climbing equipment." The lie came smoothly and easily. There were no such markings anywhere around the cabin. But it might buy Grimmer some precious time and keep them away from certain critical areas. The four men spread out and began a systematic, clearly professional search of the area around the cabin. I watched from my doorway, every muscle in my body tense, knowing that if they found the cave entrance, everything would be over. An hour passed with agonizing slowness. Then 2 hours. The men worked methodically and carefully, clearly very experienced at exactly this type of search operation. One of them approached the rock pile that concealed the tunnel entrance. I held my breath, my heart pounding so hard I was absolutely certain they could hear it. He examined the rocks closely, even moved a few of the smaller ones, peering carefully into gaps between stones. Then, miraculously, he moved on to search another area. The tunnel entrance remained hidden and undiscovered. After 3 hours of intensive professional searching, the men regrouped near their leader. There was a brief, intense conversation I couldn't quite hear from my position. Lots of gesturing and what looked like a disagreement or argument about strategy. Finally, the leader approached me again. "We'll be moving our search further east," he said, those cold eyes studying my face carefully for any sign of deception. "But we will definitely be back. That animal is still out there somewhere, and we will find it eventually." "I understand completely." "Miss Bergstrom," he said, stopping right at the edge of my property line and turning back. "Your father was protecting something up here. We know that now with absolute certainty. We just don't know exactly what yet. If you know anything at all, it would be very much in your best interest to tell us now. The organization I represent has considerable resources and influence. We could make your life very comfortable and secure." "Or very difficult?" I asked, unable to stop myself. His smile didn't reach his cold eyes at all. "We always prefer cooperation to confrontation, Miss Bergstrom, but we are very, very good at getting what we need one way or another. I strongly suggest you think carefully about that." Then they left, disappearing over the eastern ridge. But I knew with absolute certainty they would be back, and next time they would bring more people and better equipment. I waited a full hour, watching until I was completely sure they were gone and not circling back to catch me off guard, before I ran back to the cave as fast as I could through the deep snow. Grimmer was standing when I burst through the tunnel entrance, fully upright despite his injuries, emanating a presence that was simultaneously utterly terrifying and somehow magnificent. "They know," I said without any preamble, my words tumbling out. "They know about you. They know about my father. They'll definitely be back with more people and better equipment." "I know," Grimmer replied with surprising calm. "I heard every single word through the mountain. The stone carries sound far better than you might think when you know how to listen properly. So what do we do now? How do we prepare?" "We?" Grimmer tilted his massive head slightly, ancient eyes studying me. "This is not your fight, young one. This is not your burden to carry. I can disappear completely, enter the deep stone sleep somewhere in the high mountains where they will never find me. You can go back to your normal life. Pretend none of this ever happened." "They murdered my father," I said, and saying it out loud made it devastatingly real in a way it hadn't been before. "Didn't they? It wasn't a heart attack at all." Grimmer's long silence was confirmation enough. The truth I'd suspected but been afraid to fully acknowledge. "How did they do it?" a substance extracted and concentrated from certain rare mountain herbs. It mimics a massive heart attack perfectly, leaves absolutely no trace that any standard medical examination would ever find. Your father discovered their organization's existence. He was planning to expose them publicly. They couldn't allow that to happen. Pure rage flooded through me. White-hot rage unlike anything I'd ever felt before in my entire life. What organization exactly? Who are these people? They call themselves the Order of the Sacred Hammer, Grimmer said heavily. Direct descendants of the original organized troll hunters from medieval times. They've modernized over the centuries, adapted brilliantly, hidden themselves within legitimate businesses and research institutions and even government agencies. But their fundamental goal remains exactly the same as it was 800 years ago. Complete and total elimination of all supernatural beings from Scandinavia. But why? What possible threat could you pose in the modern world? We are living proof, Grimmer said with devastating simplicity. Proof that the old stories contained genuine truth. Proof that there is far more to this world than what modern science can measure and explain. Proof that the church and the crown and all the powerful institutions that built their authority on destroying the old ways and the old beliefs were fundamentally wrong. Our very existence undermines 1,000 years of their carefully constructed historical narrative. I understood then, with perfect clarity. This wasn't actually about danger or public safety at all. This was about control, about power, about maintaining a version of history and reality that justified centuries of atrocities and systematic persecution. Then we fight back, I said with fierce determination. We expose them and everything they've done. Fight with what proof? Grimmer asked gently but practically. You think anyone would believe a grief-stricken 19-year-old girl claiming her father was murdered by a secret organization that hunts mythological creatures? You would be dismissed immediately as delusional at best, dangerously insane at worst. Then we get proof that can't be dismissed or explained away. We document everything systematically. We gather irrefutable evidence. We build a case so comprehensive that they have been doing this successfully for 800 years, Solveig. They are extraordinarily, brutally good at covering their tracks and eliminating threats before they can become dangerous. I wanted desperately to argue, but I knew he was absolutely right. A completely different approach was needed. You said there are others, I said slowly as an idea began forming in my mind. Other supernatural creatures still alive and hiding. Do they know about this organization? Some do. Most hide so completely and carefully that they rarely have contact even with their own kind anymore, let alone with trolls. The Great Erasure taught all of us that isolation equals survival. But you must have names, locations, some way to contact them if you needed to. Grimmer looked at me for a long, measuring moment, clearly trying to understand where I was going with this line of questioning. Why are you asking this specifically? Because maybe isolation isn't actually survival anymore, I said, the idea becoming clearer and more urgent as I spoke. Maybe isolation is just very slow extinction now. If there are truly only dozens of you left total across all of Scandinavia, you desperately need to work together somehow. Pool knowledge and resources, coordinate responses to threats, fight back as a united community instead of as isolated, vulnerable individuals. That kind of coordination and gathering is exactly what nearly destroyed us completely the last time we tried it, Grimmer said grimly. When we fought openly and gathered together in one place, we lost catastrophically. Hundreds died in a single night. You lost because you fought the way they expected you to fight, I countered passionately. Because you were trying to defend specific physical places and things that were already being systematically destroyed. But what if instead of trying to defend the old world that's already gone, we focus entirely on preserving what's left? Document everything that remains. Record all the knowledge and history and truth. Hide it so securely and redundantly that even if they somehow manage to kill all of you, the truth survives and will eventually come out? I could see the idea taking root in Grimmer's ancient mind, new possibilities forming after centuries of defensive thinking. Your father suggested something remarkably similar to this. He finally said slowly, hope creeping into his voice for the first time. Several years ago, he wanted to create what he called a comprehensive archive of our true histories told in our own words, our actual knowledge preserved accurately, our real stories without the propaganda. But he ran out of time before he could make it happen. They killed him before the work could really begin. Then I'll finish what he started, I said with far more confidence than I actually felt inside. I'll complete his mission, but I'm going to need your help. I need you to teach me absolutely everything you know. And I need you to introduce me to the others who are still surviving out there. That will take years, many years of patient work. Then it takes years. I'm not going anywhere. This is my life now. And that's exactly how my real education began. That first year with Grimr, 1984, was absolutely transformative. He taught me about the ancient ways, the old pacts between his people and the land itself. He explained in detail how trolls could communicate through the mountains, sending complex vibrations through the stone that other earth-connected beings could interpret and understand. He showed me the mysterious symbols carved into the cave walls, a written language that actually predated the runes by thousands of years. And slowly, carefully, he began the delicate process of arranging meetings with other survivors. The first was with a huldra named Astrid. She came on a summer night in June 1985, appearing at the edge of the forest line like something from a dream or a painting. She was beautiful beyond any words I possessed to describe it, with long, flowing blonde hair and features that seemed to shift subtly, depending on the angle you viewed them from. When she turned, I saw the distinctive hollow in her back and the cow's tail she made absolutely no effort to hide. "So this is Eric's daughter," she said in a voice like wind through leaves. I was deeply sorry to hear of his passing. He was a rare human, one who truly understood what we are. Over the following hours, Astrid told me the truth about the huldras, about how they were tied to the forests, how they felt every tree that fell, about desperate attempts to protect what remained, about the huldra named Sigrid, who died screaming when her bond tree was cut down in the 1600s. An event that every huldra within 100 kilometers felt simultaneously. Over the next 2 years, I met a fossegrim named Björn, who played music so hauntingly beautiful it made me weep. I met a nøkken named Kara, who still grieved for children she'd failed to save from drowning despite her desperate efforts. I documented everything in careful journals. Every story, every truth, every detail, creating the archive my father had dreamed of. But I also began to understand something crucial. These beings needed to reconnect. They needed community again. In spring 1990, a Nisa named Olav appeared in my cabin, barely 40 centimeters tall, with a long white beard and a red cap. He'd been watching me for 2 years before finally approaching. "You're building something," he said. "Something important. We Nisser want to help." By summer 1990, I had 47 Nisa volunteers serving as messengers across Scandinavia. The network that had died in 1643 slowly began to rebuild. Then, in March 1988, everything accelerated when a weathered man approached me in Eidfjord. "My name is Harald Johansson. I knew your father. He was murdered. I have proof." Harald had been a hunter for the Order for 20 years. Then he met a huldra named Elena, who he was sent to kill. She was healing trees, not hurting anyone. He couldn't do it. The Order sent someone else who succeeded. But Elena had thanked Harald for 3 days of life before she died. My father had recruited Harald afterward. They'd worked together gathering evidence for 2 years before my father was eliminated. "They're planning something called the Final Cleansing," Harald told me. "New weapons. New technology. They plan to eliminate every remaining supernatural being within a decade." Harold moved near my cabin. Together, we built a comprehensive archive of evidence. We filmed Grimr's testimony. We recorded Astrid, Björn, Kara, but we kept waiting for the right moment to release it. In 2003, I found a letter revealing I had a half-sister, Carina Dahlström, daughter of my father, and a woman named Ingrid, who'd also been a guardian. It took us 3 years to find Karine. She was working for the Order, one of their best hunters. She believed they were making the world safer. She believed supernatural beings had killed her mother. She had no idea the Order had actually murdered her mother for protecting those same beings. We spent years planning how to reveal the truth to her. That moment came on winter solstice, December 21st, 2018. The Order planned Operation Winter's End. Simultaneous strikes on 6 locations. We managed to warn 4, but 4 huldras died in Hedmark. 2 fossegrims were captured in Hordaland, and they came for Grimmer. When I arrived, I found Grimmer surrounded by allies, Astrid, Björn, Kara, 15 Nisser led by Olav, and Harold with a rifle, standing between the Order and the cave entrance. "These creatures are more human than you are," Harold said to the Order commander, "and I'm not moving." That's when I saw Karina, my half-sister, standing with the Order. "You're Eric Bergstrom's daughter," I called out to her. "Your mother was Ingrid Dahlstrom. Everything they told you about her death is a lie." Grimmer spoke directly to her. "We knew your mother. She died trying to prevent exactly this." Karine looked at the assembled beings. They weren't attacking. They were just waiting, testing whether humanity would choose violence or understanding. She lowered her weapon. "These are what killed my mother? These people?" She'd said people, not monsters. The Order retreated, but Karine stayed. She spent 3 days reading journals, watching videos, examining everything we'd compiled over decades. On the 4th day, she cried. "They lied about everything. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be ready, because I'm going to help you destroy them." Over the next 2 years, we systematically dismantled Order operations across Scandinavia. We exposed corrupt officials. We revealed funding sources. We submitted evidence to international authorities. We couldn't destroy them completely, but we weakened them significantly, and we strengthened the supernatural community, the network fully rebuilt. In summer 2020, Grimmer revealed his final secret. When we sleep deep in mountains, we form a geological stabilization network. We're literally holding parts of Scandinavia together. Without us, there will be earthquakes, landslides, possible volcanic eruptions within a decade. How many trolls does it take? Perhaps 50, strategically placed. There are 3 of you left. Yes, and I'm 800 years old, maybe 2 more decades. Then we need more trolls. Finding Helga, the female troll, took 6 months. She lived near the Swedish border. After long discussions with Grimmer about hope and possibility, she agreed to create new life. We found the perfect cave in Jotunheimen. Deep, perfect minerals, protected location. In winter 2022, Helga entered the cave and began the 30-year gestation, which brings us to tonight, December 11th, 2023. 1 year into gestation, 29 remaining. 3 hours ago, the phone call came. A company called Mountain Peak Resorts purchased land in Jotunheimen. They're beginning surveying operations tomorrow. Their site includes Helga's mountain. They plan to blast tunnels. Harold discovered this morning. Mountain Peak is an order-front company. They know where Helga is. They're using legal development to justify entering with explosives. They're going to destroy the cave, kill Helga and the future. Karine arrives 2 hours later. Harold has documentation spread across my table. "Tell me everything," Karine says. I explain. The company. The Order's plan. The 12 hours we have left. "Then we go nuclear," Karine says. "Release everything simultaneously. Make it impossible to suppress." "That exposes every being," Harold warns. "They're already targets. The final cleansing is coming. At least this way the world knows." We spend 3 hours planning. By 2 a.m. we have our strategy. Release everything at dawn. 6 a.m. 50 platforms simultaneously. 5 journalists. 100 Nisa messengers. And we reveal Helga's location publicly. Make her a cause the world can see. Dare the Order to attack under global scrutiny. At 5:45 a.m. we're ready. We gather before my camera. Me, Karine, Harold, and Grimmer. "My name is Solveig Bergstrom," I begin. This is my sister Karin and our ally Harald. Behind me is Grimmer, a troll who has lived 800 years. For 40 years I've protected him. Today we tell the world why. I speak for 10 minutes. About my father. The order, the great erasure, the truth behind every legend. About Helga in Jotunheimen, creating new life. In 12 hours, a company begins blasting operations. They claim to build a resort. Truth is, they're eliminating the last pregnant troll on Earth. Karin speaks about her mother. Harold about his 20 years as a hunter. About Elena and the moment everything changed. Grimmer speaks last. We were never your enemies. We were guardians. We saved lives. We taught children. We protected homes. And we were thanked with systematic elimination. But still we hope. This is our truth. What you do with it is your choice. At exactly 6 a.m., December 12th, 2023, we press upload. The truth releases into the world like a dam breaking. Within an hour, we're trending everywhere. Within 3 hours, major news outlets run stories. By noon, governments call emergency sessions. Scientists descend. Journalists, the curious, the believers, the skeptics. The order tries denying everything, calls it misinformation. But the evidence is too comprehensive. Grimmer agrees to examination. Other beings come forward. Truth cannot be contained once released. And Mountain Peak announces they're suspending all operations pending studies. They have no choice now. The world is watching. Helga is safe, for now. 2 weeks later, the world still processes. Calls for protection, for research, for exploitation, for elimination. But we bought time. 29 years for Helga to complete her gestation. Time for humanity to decide what we want to be. Grimar sits beside me, looking over mountains he's protected for 8 centuries. You did it. What your father tried. You changed the world. We changed it together. What happens now? Now we protect Helga. For 29 more years. We ensure that in 2052, a new troll is born into a world that knows they exist, that values them. And if the world chooses elimination, then we fight. Like we've fought for 40 years, but this time in the open, with allies, with truth. In 2052, I'll be 88. If I live that long, I'll see the first new troll in centuries. Proof that hope was justified. That my father's death wasn't in vain. That 40 years mattered. The world knows now. Trolls are real. Huldras still sing in forests. Fossegrims play by waterfalls. Nøkken watch over waters. Nisr remember when humans were friends. And all deserve to exist. Not as myths. As living beings with histories and rights and futures. This is my father's legacy. And mine. The truth is out. Now we live with the consequences, together.